now, justices for the Colorado Supreme Court are considering whether to block former President Trump from appearing on Colorado ballots next year. Both sides gave their arguments this week. One cites the 14th Amendment, barring people who incite an insurrection from holding office. The other says a lower court judge's decision that there was an insurrection should be overturned, claiming that what happened on January 6th doesn't rise to that level.
I think the duration has to be longer than 3 hours. I think the geographical scope has to be broader than one building.
Now, to be clear, the attack on the Capitol lasted 6 hours. Now, given the arguments, it seems whether the former president can appear on the Colorado ballot next year could depend on the definition of an insurrection.
Yeah, so this morning we are bringing some legal context to this case with the help of our legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Whitney, good morning.
Good morning, Jordan and Corey.
So I guess the big question first to address is there an actual legal definition for insurrection?
Yeah, there is a legal definition that this lower court judge actually imposed, but what this really highlights and what I like about this case and the fact that we get to discuss it with the people is that this really shapes how our law is made. This is common law or judge-made law, precedent, stare decisis. It all means the same thing, and essentially we have these laws in place, so we have our Constitution, but then the judges have these factual scenarios that come before them and they have to make a decision. So here the lower court judge said an insurrection, it's a three-part test. And so number one, a public use of force or threat of force. Number two, by a group of people. That part's easy. Number three, to hinder or prevent execution of the Constitution of the United States. So now you have these three factors that have to be proved. Is there an argument on both sides that can be made that yes, this was an insurrection, no, this wasn't an insurrection? And of course there is, and we saw it before the Colorado Supreme Court.
Now, it's so interesting. So in a similar case in Minnesota, a justice there essentially said, after talking to both sides, it's in the eye of the beholder what the definition of insurrection is. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, and I think that sort of illuminates this notion of common law. You know, one judge in Texas might say, no, this doesn't even remotely come close to an insurrection for the reasons he was saying. It was 3 hours, it was just this one building, etc. But others are going to say this absolutely was an insurrection. You know, almost 200 officers were injured, people were killed. They were trying to stop the Electoral College from proceeding. So there's an argument in both sides. And so here he's saying, well, what does an insurrection look like? Does it have to have, atomic weapons? Does it have to be a certain number of people? And I think legally there can be an argument on both sides, which I know can frustrate people when they're saying, well, which side is it? But that's the point of the law, is you can really argue both sides a lot of times.
Well, and you comb through the law far more than your average citizen. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on what the best points from each of those arguments were.
Yeah, and I think that it boils down to a few arguments on both sides. So Trump, on the Trump side, they're saying, look, the text doesn't define president. It says no person shall be a senator, a representative, or an elector. So it doesn't say president. If they intended it to be president, they would have used that word. It was a handful of rioters at best that just focused on one building for a few hours. And finally, here, one judge should not be able to overturn the will of the people. So that's the Trump argument. On the other side, they're saying, look, you're telling me then because it doesn't have the word president in it, somebody could be prevented from running for county sheriff but could run for president, right? And they're saying, but it also says in the text, any office. So even though it doesn't say president, it says any office. So there's all these arguments, and clearly this was a threat and use of force when people died and all these people were injured. So these are interesting legal arguments that I think we'll see ultimately to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Clearly a lot more to come on this as they make decisions. Whitney, as always, thanks for